So this is a sort of 3-session trailer for the Winter Intensive Retreat. And we're going to be looking at a particular text on the retreat called the Vimalakirti Nodesha. So don't worry at all if you've never heard of that, that's totally fine. But before I say any more about that, I'm just going to recap a little bit of context for that, because I'm assuming, put your hand up if you weren't here last week. Yeah, I thought there'd probably be a few. So yeah, we'll have a little recap for that. So if you cast your mind back about 2,500 years, well actually a bit less than that, at the point at which the Buddhist teachings began to be actually written down, because originally they were, it was an oral tradition for about the first 100 years after the Buddha's time. So back then, the teachings were written down, that were the teachings that were the words of the Buddha, that are considered to be by scholars and by practitioners, the actual sort of words of the Buddha that the Buddha himself, the historical Buddha, taught to living beings. Where's my water? Sorry, dry already. So things, some of you will have heard of some of these things, don't worry if you haven't, but things like the Four Noble Truths, the 5 Skandhas, the Noble Eightfold Path, the Threefold Way, the 5 Spiritual Faculties. Some of you will have heard of some of those, don't worry if you haven't. You've probably heard that Buddhism has lots of lists, and those are examples of some of the most famous ones. And at that time, the Buddha was a historical being who had become enlightened, but he was a historical being and he was teaching other beings in front of him in the same way, as I'm sort of sitting here today trying to share my thoughts with you. He was doing it obviously on a way different level to me. But then what happened over the centuries after the Buddha's parinirvana, which is when his physical body passed away, after that time, what happened gradually over the centuries is that the teachings kind of became really kind of rigid and stale and kind of calcified. And it was like, it's something that human beings tend to do with stuff anyway, is something can be fresh and wonderful and new, and we kind of nail it down, and then it becomes sort of stuck and staid and dull. So over the centuries, that's what happened with the Buddha's teachings, and they became more and more sort of obsessed with sort of concrete things, obsessed with the minutiae of things. So they became sort of more and more obsessed with the minutiae of all the little rules that the monks were supposed to follow, and all the different ways they were supposed to wear their robe. Learning to recite lots of texts, but not really spending much time kind of reflecting on the deeper meaning of the texts. So all in all, things that had been a means to an end became an end in themselves. What happens at a time like that is that either something becomes so solidified that it sort of dies a death, really, or some people find a new kind of inspiration to bring it alive again. And that's what happened several hundred years after the Buddha's death. A new movement sort of gradually gained momentum, a new movement called the Mahayana tradition. Now, in the Mahayana, the Buddha in the Mahayana texts is not an Indian guy with a kind of grubby yellow robe on, walking around with a bowl in his hand and sort of with dust on his feet. The Buddha in the Mahayana texts is this incredibly is like a cosmic vision. The trans-historical Buddha, he's a cosmic vision of he's been teaching for endless eons. He's manifested at all times in all places. He's superhuman. He's got all these superhuman powers. He's sort of radiantly gold, like our own Buddha figure here, and everything that sort of goes on around him has this air of magic and myth and mystery. In fact, Sangharakshita, who was the originator of our Buddhist movement, described the Mahayana scriptures as transcendental science fiction. So there's this idea of this kind of really cosmic vision of the universe. And in a way, we don't need to worry about the truth or the untruth of that on a sort of literal level, because the point of that, the point of those texts emerging was to really shake up this staid, boring, uninspiring way in which the tradition had become just really stuck. And these texts were like, look at the vast truth and the beauty and the mystery and the bizarreness of the Buddha in his most cosmic realm. And in a way, so the Vimalakirti Nadesha, the text that we're going to be looking at on this retreat, is one of the most famous texts from that particular period in Buddhist history. And if I was going to try to sort of sum up what that text says in lots of different ways through a number of different chapters, here's the text here. So through all of that, if I was going to sum all of that up in sort of one sentence, Vimalakirti, who's the main character of the text, is basically saying to all the beings, to all the monks, to all the enlightened beings that he's speaking to, he is saying, wake up, you're missing the point. And he says that, wake up, you're missing the point, and he says it in lots and lots and lots of different ways through the whole text. So for those of you not coming on the retreat, you've just had the summary of you've just had the punchline. So this text, the Vimalakirti Nadesha, it's a kind of it's a mythic tale. Akashamitra was talking last week about myth as narratives and stories that can point us to something deeper about the meaning of life. It's an allegorical tale, which means that the characters and the scenes within it kind of stand for something other than what they sort of seem to on the surface. And so the central character is this guy, Vimalakirti. And he's the central teacher throughout the whole text. And he's teaching the Dharma at the very, very highest level. And one way of thinking about him is that he represents a principle of enlightenment, but he does it in a really unusual form. Because most of us imagine an enlightened being to be like a monk type figure or a nun type figure, or, I mean, nowadays we have the gold figures sitting in this way. But Vimalakirti, the character, the lead character in this, lead teaching character in this text, he presents as a normal bloke, a normal man who lives in a city called Vaishali in India. And he lives in a house, he's quite well off, he's quite wealthy, he's got family and children and servants, he's a successful businessman, and yet he's an enlightened bodhisattva. And that in itself was a huge challenge to the status quo at the time, because it was basically saying, it sort of doesn't matter what you look like, you could still be enlightened. You don't have to look a certain way. So in a way, that was one of the, by creating this text, the mysterious writer or writers who wrote the text, by creating this character in this way as what we call a householder, in a sense, on the surface, could have looked like any of us. And yet, he was an enlightened practitioner at the highest level. And over and over again through the text, he speaks to, he inspires lots of sort of ordinary people, the ordinary people of Vaishali. But when he is in communication with the senior practitioners and even bodhisattvas who themselves are sort of enlightened or pretty nearly enlightened, over and over again he shows them up. He shows them up as them just having a limited vision of the true picture of the vastness and the unimaginable mystery of the Dharma. So even very highly advanced practitioners, he keeps catching them out and showing them up. In a way, in the doing of that, this is part of the message of the sutra, was this Mahayana tradition saying, don't be complacent. Don't think that just because you know the texts and you know and you can recite them and you've done lots of meditation, don't think that makes you like some kind of advanced being. You know, don't miss the point. Wake up, don't miss the point. The map is not the territory. Because again and again he was trying to show them that they had all got kind of obsessed with the map, and they just kept making the map more and more and more beautiful with more and more and more detail on it. And in the meantime, the actual territory, the actual experience of the Dharma, of enlightenment, was out there, was way beyond this pretty little map that they just kept fiddling around with. So the map is not the territory. And it reminded me of a time when I was, I've got personally, maybe I'm just middle-aged, well I am just middle-aged, but maybe that's why, but I have this real hatred of GPS in cars. I just think it's taken away any modicum of common sense that anybody ever had behind a wheel. So I was driving up to Adhisthana a couple of years ago with another order member, a millennial order member who shall remain nameless, who was glued to her GPS the whole way up. And we were driving round the sort of the morass of Birmingham, trying to find our way past Birmingham, and I looked up and I said, oh yeah, we're straight on here, because I could see the road sign. I can't remember the name of what we were looking for, but I could see the road sign that said, you know, straight on. And she turned off, and I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like staring at the GPS. She's going, yeah, no, it says to go off here. And I'm like, look, there's a road sign out there. She's staring at the GPS. She's staring at the map. And I'm looking at the territory, and I'm going, can you get a grip? You've missed the point. You've missed it. And then, of course, we went down there, and then we had to come back again and go back onto the road. And I just thought, I think modern life is so like that, isn't it? That we're more and more and more caught up in our maps and missing the territory. And in a way, that's what that was the message that Vimalakirti was saying again and again and again throughout this text. So I'm going to give you a little example and read a bit of an example. Now, where's my clock? Okay. So, page 42. Okay. Why have I said page 42? Oh, yes, that's right. So at one point in the text, everything's like larger than life and sort of, anyway, you'll see what I mean. So at one point in the text, some people were going to go and visit Vimalakirti, okay? So the beings were going to visit Vimalakirti. So there were 8,000 bodhisattvas, 500 disciples, a great number of chakras, brahmas, lokapalas, many hundreds of thousands of gods and goddesses, all followed the crown prince Manjushri to listen to the Dharma. So you've got all these hundreds of thousands of beings all traipsing off to see Vimalakirti. Meanwhile, one of the monks suddenly thinks, oh, well, where are they going to sit? Where are they all going to sit, all these hundreds of thousands of beings? And Vimalakirti, because he's an advanced bodhisattva, could read the mind of this monk. And he said, Reverend Shariputra, which was the monk, did you come here for the sake of the Dharma, or did you come here for the sake of a chair? And Shariputra replies, I came for the sake of the Dharma, not for the sake of a chair. And then Vimalakirti continues, Reverend Shariputra, he who is interested in the Dharma is not interested even in his own body, much less in a chair. And then I won't read on, but then Vimalakirti goes on to list, he goes through a whole list of all the standard teachings of early Buddhism, basically, and says, if you're interested in these teachings, then you're not interested in the Dharma. And in fact, if you're interested in the Dharma, you shouldn't have any interest in anything. So I'd like to just imagine for a moment, imagine if Vimalakirti came in here right now. You might not know, because as I said, he looked like an ordinary bloke. I mean, he's from Versailles, so he'd probably be Indian looking, but apart from that, you wouldn't know. And maybe he'd look like a rich businessman. Imagine if he came in here right now and he said to all of you, you're all here, you're sort of Monday people, so you're not newcomers. If he said to you that if you're interested in the Dharma, then you should not be interested in anything that you've learned at the LBC. If you're interested in the Dharma, you shouldn't be interested in anything that you've learned here. So I just want you to pair up just now, just literally for a couple of minutes, and I just want to say, how would that make you feel if someone came in and said that? So just pair up with someone next to you. How would you feel if someone came in and said, look, you're missing the point. You don't want to be interested in anything that you're learning here. So just pair up with someone next to you, just for a minute. Okay, has everybody had a chance to say something? No. Okay, swapping over. Good thinking. Okay, golly, you had a lot to say. So give me some shout outs. How would you feel if someone came in and said that?
Intrigued.
Intrigued, okay. Intrigued, that's a good one. Anything else?
Oh, I wouldn't mind because I don't retain lists of like Buddhist teachings.
Okay. Okay, but say if they were saying anything you'd learned about how to meditate or anything like that, that doesn't matter either.
Yeah, I'm not.
You're not bothered.
No, well, I haven't done that well in that either. So
You haven't done that well in that either. Okay, all right. So you just ride it out. We've got one that's intrigued, that's one that's not too bothered. What else? Anything else?
Confused.
Who said confused? Who's that? Oh, hello, yes. Confused, intrigued, not that worried. Anything else?
I disagree.
You disagree?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. But that, so if we're talking about how you might feel about it, so by disagreeing, you wouldn't, you'd be a bit upset, a bit. Yeah. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yeah.
I mean, I think, how do you learn about this without someone teaching it?
Yeah. Okay. So you're a bit sort of like unsettled and affronted and confused.
Deliberately obtuse.
Like being deliberately obtuse, but also maybe a bit intrigued as well. And it's interesting, isn't it, when we are challenged with what we think we know, for most of us, it's not entirely comfortable, is it? It might be slightly unpleasant, uncomfortable. It might be quite slightly interesting, uncomfortable, like intrigued implies there's a sort of interesting, but it's not comfortable. It's not in our comfort zone. I like the fact that you said confused, because that was my thought. I was thinking, how would I feel? And because of course in the text, a lot of the people that Vimalakirti is challenging are like way more spiritually advanced than frankly we are. Just way more spiritually advanced. So there's also that thing of like if you sort of think of yourself as a bit of an expert at something and then someone sort of challenges that, something happened, your ego something comes up against your ego in that process. So this is the territory of the Mahayana. It's about challenging people and saying, wake up, shaking us out of our kind of comfort zone and our assumption that we know stuff. That is, and that's sort of like, how can I put it? And that maybe signifies a certain level of achievement. And actually, I think at that level, it could also be quite humiliating. I mean, that's one of the things that I thought it could be quite humiliating. And there's actually something in the right context. There's something very spiritually fruitful about confusion and humiliation. I don't mean humiliation for the sake of making someone, trying to put someone down, but humiliation that makes us go, oh gosh, oh really? What does the Dharma mean? What is it all about? What does it mean to be enlightened? What does it mean to have broken through to enlightenment? How can I imagine that I kind of know what that is? So, one way of thinking about the point that Vimalakirti is trying to make is that the Dharma is ultimately beyond verbalization. It's beyond concepts, it's beyond formulations, it's beyond words. Now, of course, in order to talk about it, we have to use words. So how do you communicate something that is beyond words when all you've got is words? Because all language is conceptual. Every time you use a word, it is inherently a concept. And that's why one of the things we're constantly working on in meditation, I'm constantly working on in meditation, is that thing about trying to drop below the narrative and actually experience the experience that isn't words, that is the actual experience of your lived life in this moment, not the words that you might tell about it, because that's all concepts. So one of the alternative names for this text, the Vimalakirti Nadesha, which actually means the teachings of Vimalakirti, or in this translation it's called the Holy Teaching of Vimalakirti. One of the alternative titles uses the word inconceivable. So that's a theme that comes through the text as well. The idea that the Dharma is inconceivable, that the truth is inconceivable, and that inconceivability is what liberates us. So the alternative title for the text is the inconceivable liberation, or the inconceivable emancipation. And this is Vimalakirti challenging us, or challenging the characters in the text, but really, basically challenging us with the biggest possible vision of what life means, of what the Dharma means, of what freedom means. So going back to the example of Shariputra and the chair, with Vimalakirti saying, are you here for the Dharma or are you here for a chair? As a bit of a sort of example of what I'm trying to say, a bit later on in the text, in order to sort of prove his point to Shariputra, Vimalakirti produces 3 how many zeros is that? 3,200,000 lion thrones. He sort of creates them out of nowhere, or plucks them out of nowhere, and then fits them all in his house so that all the bodhisattvas can sit down when they get there. Now, I don't know what a lion throne is, but it sounds pretty grand to me. Someone could have a field day doing a sort of CGI something or other of what a lion throne might look like. But can you sort of get a sense of the contrast that Vimalakirti is trying to make between Shariputra, who's like probably looking round at the sorts of chairs we've got in here and going, oh look, we've only got about 12. Where are we going to put the other 3 million people? And then Vimalakirti's like, don't worry about the chairs. Boom, here's some lion thrones. That there's something in that says, like, whatever you think you know, it's way bigger than that. It's way more incredulous than that. Is that the right word? Incredible than that. So Vimalakirti's message is using these, partly uses these magical acts of like creating 3 million lion thrones to sort of evoke how much the Dharma is beyond what our tiny minds can really conceive of. And in another context, if there was some guy there who just was repeatedly kind of telling, oh, look, you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong, and sort of catching you out and basically being a bit of a know-all, because he's sort of like, Vimalakirti's kind of like basically saying, look, you don't know and I know, and he's a bit of a know-all. When I was having a bit of a laugh at home, I live with Buddhists, and the other night, and we were joking about, and realised this cultural reference might be very niche for people who are over the age of 40-something, but anyway, I'm going to go for it anyway. Does anyone remember Harry Enfield, the comedian? Yeah, a few people do. Very good, very good. So he had this character. Do you know what? I can't even remember the character, but he used to have this character that would go, you you don't want to do it like that. You want to do it like this. And it would just pop up in every scene going, you don't want to do it like that. You want to do it like this. Whenever Vimalakirti is mentioned in my house, someone will go, oh yeah, you don't want to do it like that. You want to do it like this. And it seems as if he's a bit of a know-all, but this is one of the mysteries of being a bodhisattva as well, is that bodhisattvas teach beings what they need to learn, and they do it in a way that's going to have an effect. So, which is called skillful means. They work through skillful means, and sometimes for some of us, the skillful means, sometimes we do need someone to give us a wake-up call. And that is a skillful means to sort of shake us out of something that we're stuck in. So Vimalakirti is not Harry Enfield. He is a highly skilled bodhisattva who is teaching people in these ways, teaching beings in these ways, because he wants them to really break through to full enlightenment. So it is for the benefit of all beings that he's doing that. Just as a very, very quick recap, like that thing they do at the start of the episode of Netflix, when they zoom through the scene so quickly that even when you have watched the previous episode, you can't follow what's going on. So I'll do one of those now. So we're looking at this text called the Vimalakirti Nirdesha, which is a wake-up call to early Buddhist teachings having gone stale and dry and calcified. And then this text comes through like hundreds of other texts from within the Mahayana tradition, comes through absolutely bursting with magic and mystery and cosmic weirdness and going beyond time and space and what Sangharakshita calls transcendental science fiction, which is probably not a lot like what you've been learning in the small shrine room with Sangadhara and Abhayanandi. So this text is a wake-up call against this stuckness that the early Buddhist tradition had come into. And as Akashamitra was saying last week, it's it's not. It's such a human thing. This is what we do, and we see it if you look at the history of art, if you look at the history of music. There'll be a certain kind of art or a certain kind of music that is, is famous in a particular era, and then it kind of gets a bit old and a bit dry, and then something else completely new comes through. So it's sort of a human characteristic that humans do, is we have something lovely and fresh and it goes stale, and something else has to come through to freshen it. So that's what the Mahayana tradition was for Buddhism, and the Vimalakirti Nirdesha being one of the most famous texts within it. So, and there was one little example of it from the first half, where Vimalakirti, the main character, somebody's worried that there aren't going to be enough chairs, and Vimalakirti says, are you here for the Dharma, for the teachings of the Buddha, or are you here for the chairs? And it's clearly a sort of a bit of an embarrassing moment for Shariputra, who's the guy that's worried about the chairs. And we can sort of smile and think, oh, he's the fall guy. He's the one that's being made to look like a bit of an idiot. But in fact, that's talking to us, because we're like that too. We have that same human mind that has a tendency to fall into literalism, to fall into habit, to fall into doing things the same old way. And one of the examples that I can think of that I see quite a lot I normally teach on a Wednesday night, which is particularly a meditation night. So we teach newcomers, but we also teach different angles in with meditation for regulars. And over and over again, people will be getting worried about the technique of like, where are they supposed to count, and where are they supposed to do this, and who are they supposed to have in which stage if it's the metta bhavana. So that they're even people who are maybe quite experienced, and they've sort of forgotten what the actual point of the practice is. So busy sort of caught up in the technique that the principle of developing awareness, the principle of developing loving kindness has sort of been lost in the technique. So that we can all do this, we can all get to that point where things, things are, no, let me get this round the right way, means to an end rather than an end in itself, or the other way round. Anyway, you know what I mean. And the same is true of just generally of our meditation practice, that will get stale over time. That we will, people also come and say, I've always used to really enjoy meditation, and it was like this and it was like that, and now I don't anymore. As if somehow something's gone wrong or something. And actually, it's just that inspiration needs to come through, and something needs to change. So this theme about getting stuck, this theme of you've missed the point of the Dharma, is another way of thinking about that, is that it is looking at the spirit of something versus the letter of something. So, and that's a concept that's sort of common in religion and in law, isn't it? We talk about the letter of the law, following the letter of the law, or following the spirit of the law. And of course, the spirit of anything is always much more intangible and mysterious and much more difficult to define than the letter. I think that's probably why, as human beings, we tend to fall back on the letter, because it's sort of easier in a way, and we can imagine that we understand something if we understand it by the letter. So I think so part of this thing with the contrast between the spirit of something and the letter of something, I was reminded of I don't know if any of you do this, but I tend to write journals and notes and things, particularly when I'm on retreat. And I've been coming along for 20 years now, so I've got a lot of journals full of things that I've written when I've been on retreat. And I've tried to get a bit more choosy over the years, so I'll just really kind of not write like every single thing, but try and really write the things that are sort of particularly precious. And I'm always struck by the fact that when I look back and I read that journal back again, like a year later or even a month later, I read the words that I've written, and I can sort of remember that when I wrote them, I was like really inspired, or I felt like I'd had this real sense of insight, and something had felt deeply meaningful. But then I read the words, and it's just like, it sort of just doesn't do anything for me. And there's something that's lost, because when I'm there and I'm in that retreat context, I'm in a particular set of conditions. And I think most especially what I usually tend to write down is when I feel a particular sense of inspiration, of almost like transmission. That sounds a bit grand to call it that, but sometimes it does feel a bit like that, from a teacher, from a sort of a more senior person than myself, with more experience, who I really respect and admire. And they say these words, and something goes in. Something goes in a particular way. But when I just read the words back afterwards, it doesn't really have an effect. So I think there's something there about the literal cognitive words versus this mysterious sort of undefinable transmission that is the spirit of something. And I think that's part of what Vimalakirti is trying to get at in this sutra. And throughout the whole sutra at various points, the whole text at various points, Vimalakirti talks very passionately about the Dharma, trying to get people to see that they are missing the point, that they're not seeing the enormity of it and this vast cosmic vision. And then at the end of the speech, at the end of that chapter, hundreds of thousands of millions of beings become enlightened from having listened to him. And I'm sitting there and I'm reading what he said, but unfortunately I'm not one of those hundreds of thousands of millions of beings that's got enlightened by hearing the words that he said. So there is something about that. Yeah, I can't think of anything more to call it than that spirit, that there's something mysterious. And this is what Vimalakirti is wanting us to never lose sight of and to keep opening towards. And back in the Buddha's day, so we've said a lot about I've said a bit about early Buddhism getting stale and staid and stuck and boring. Because back when the Buddha was alive, he would have been this shining, living example of an enlightened being. So the inspiration would have been sitting right there in front of people. And then, of course, it was over the years as that was just written down and then passed down through the ages. But that positive spirit of, it's hard to imagine, isn't it? What might it be like to sit in the presence of an enlightened being? It's sort of hard to imagine what that might be like. But even if we could try to imagine it, the effect of that would have had such a strong effect on people. I mean, and that's why I console myself with. There's all sorts of things in the Pali Canon when the Buddha speaks to someone and that person, they were a murderer and then suddenly they're enlightened, and I think, it seems to be a bit harder nowadays. But I could go on about my theories about scientific progress and technology making it harder, but I won't. So there's something there about the presence of that indefinable something that is enlightenment, that is the spirit of enlightenment. And we also need to be, what we also need for that spirit to land in us is we need to be receptive listeners. Because there's also examples in the Buddhist in the Pali Canon of people coming up to the Buddha and going, what's going on with you then? And the Buddha's like, well, I'm an awakened being, and they just go, oh, all right, okay, and then they just wander off. So that they obviously weren't in a receptive frame of mind to be able to go, wow. He's an enlightened being. That's why he's got this kind of vibe about him. So we need to be a receptive listener, and we need to be in conditions that enable us to be receptive and to listen. So I'm just going to invite you now. We're going to get into pairs again in a moment. And I'd like you to we'll just have a sit quietly for a minute or two first. Because what I'd like for you to have a think about is, do you have an example from your own life of a time when you've had this sense of having an insight or an inspiration that's kind of come to you, perhaps on a retreat or, from a teacher, or it might not have even been a formal teacher, it might just have been someone that you knew, or in a situation where something something came through. You caught the spirit of something, and you saw something more deeply. You had a deeper insight into something really important about life. So if you just pair up with somebody next to you and just actually, I tell you what, let's sit for a minute first so you've got a chance to think. You don't need to sit in any formal way. Literally just close your eyes and just have a think about, can you think of an example of a time when when something has really, really landed for you. Anybody willing to share a little bit? Hear from one or two people what they shared.
I will, but I always talk too much, don't I? It's always me.
That's all right, Simon. Someone has to break the embarrassed silence,
Okay.
so you can go for it.
I was like saying that when I'm physically exhausted, so if I've been surfing or skiing and I'm absolutely destroyed physically,
Right.
and then I stare at a fire, I've had moments of serenity and feeling, there it is, there it is. But it comes through physical exhaustion and being in nature.
Physical exhaustion and being in nature and
Yeah.
staring into a fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you realise-
It all sounds very like, primal man.
Probably, I don't know.
Yeah, but
Stupid man.
no. I'm sort of laughing, but actually, it's kind of true, isn't it? That there's something very profound about that. That it's a very sort of profoundly human experience, and would have been for our ancient ancestors to be very physically tired and to be staring into the fire and to be deeply connected with the natural world. So I'm slightly teasing you, but actually it's very so there was a sense somewhere in that of connecting with something that you just couldn't quite pin down, but it was definitely something profound.
Yes.
It sounds like. Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Simon. Anybody else? Especially if you were doing physical theatre. Yes.
So my example was there is like I don't know what it's called exactly, but it's like a yoga thing where you close your eyes and you put your thumbs in your ear and you make like a humming sound like a bee.
Oh right, okay.
And it was like being in outer space, but also like being connected to something very old and kind of primordial, as you were saying almost. But it was also like scary, but not scary enough to like freak out. It was just like, whoa, this is somehow really old and ancient that's occurring.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting, isn't it? That's two examples of a sort of like kind of deeply connecting with something through something quite physical that has that sense of something, something from the beyond space and time or something like that. Maybe that's me putting words to it, but thank you, that's lovely. Do we have, let's have one more example. Has anyone got one like coming from a teacher or a speaker or a human being? Not that there's anything wrong with fire or bees buzzing. But anybody got an example from Daisy?
I was saying I'm not exactly sure when this kind of landed, but I know one of the times it landed was actually on the women's intensive retreat with you.
Oh right, okay. Oh.
The long term. Like the realization that truth doesn't, like there's no truth doesn't exist, like there is no truth.
Oh.
Because everyone's truth is different and it's changing and moving all the time. And does that make sense?
Okay, so something about that constantly moving, changing nature of reality. Yeah. I think I actually remember. Were we in a group? Was it in the group together?
I think you did a talk and I think we did open it up in the group.
Yeah. I think I remember having that conversation.
I remember the first time that landed in me, I was like,
Yeah. But was it the first? So was it the first time you'd actually heard that idea, or was it more like it was the first time that it landed in you more deeply?
I think it was more like that. Like it was like a very deep
that it landed in a different way. Yeah, thank you. That's a really lovely example, because the thing with in a certain sense, the Dharmas, the Buddhist teachings are very simple in one way, but to actually really feel them and live them, something has to drop in very, very, very deeply. Like all things are impermanent. Well, most people are not going to argue with that, because you can sort of look and go, yeah, well, that's kind of pretty much true, isn't it? Yeah, all things are impermanent. But it doesn't necessarily transform you and shoot you to enlightenment, unless that realization goes very, very, very deep. And a bit like that with the indefinability of truth and reality. Even when I say the words, it sounds a bit sort of, I don't know, something on Instagram or something. But when you really feel it, it's got that spirit, hasn't it? Yeah, thank you. That's lovely. Okay. So in very different ways there, Chi with this sort of physical experience and Daisy with a sort of in a retreat context. There's this idea that deeper level of insight that's beyond the cognitive, it's beyond the intellectual, and it's much more in the experiential, capturing this spirit beyond the letter. And we can only recognise that. We can recognise that profundity in the fire, or that ancientness, or that sense of wow, of a sort of sense of liberation when something lands in us. We can only recognise those things because there is a little spark. If you like, there's a little spark of enlightenment in us already. Because if there wasn't, we wouldn't be able to connect with the Buddha's teachings at all. It would be like me trying to connect with a bat's echolocation system. I just literally wouldn't be able to do it because I haven't got the right, apparatus. So the fact that we can have these glimpses, that we can connect, that we can have this sort of these kind of magical connections with something bigger, something we can't really explain, something profound, something that we're often in our normal lives, in our normal way we've been educated and brought up, we're sort of tends to get sidelined quite a lot. But if we can, the fact that we can notice that it can land in us and that we can choose to turn towards those experiences, it's because we have that seed of Buddhahood within us. We just have to nurture it and help it to grow in the best way that we can. So, to finish off this evening, I'd like us to finish with a little bit period of practice in a moment. So I think before we do that, I'm just going to read out something that Sangharakshita said about this Mahayana universe, the Mahayana era of Buddhism, this era with this transcendental science fiction and cosmic Buddha realm, as it were. And then, I'm just going to read that first, and then we're going to end with a sit. So Sangharakshita says that the Mahayana is that glorious ideal world of mutual interpenetration, described in such lavish detail and with such a wonderful glow of colour in the great scriptures. There, all the illusory separative walls are broken down, and everything melts and joyously flows, as it were, into every other thing, like the mutual interpenetration of innumerable beams of coloured light, or like the mutual reflection of all the different jewels on the magic jewel net of Indra, thus making what we call the realm of truth, the land of bliss.